So, Nicola, welcome to Oman.
Thank you, lovely to be here.
Is this your first visit?
It is my first visit and I was really excited to come, and it was wonderful flying in. I flew in daylight so I could see the fantastic dramatic landscape. Wish I had more time to explore.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and while you are here at TASEM, what are some of the things you will be doing with the students?
Talking to them about the process of writing, telling them the stories behind my books, because although every book is a story, every book also has a story of how it came to be written. And I very often combine fiction and non-fiction. So nearly all my work is in some way a mixture of things from the real world with things that I've made up to try and convey the information to my readers.
Now, a lot of your work focuses on the environment and
Absolutely,
animals.
yeah. Yeah.
And of course your background is as a zoologist?
Yes, I trained as a zoologist. I did my first degree at Cambridge a long time ago now. And then I went on to be a field biologist for a few years. I studied all sorts of things, bats, whales in various locations around the world. And then I went on to work for the BBC Natural History Unit as a presenter and researcher for about 10 years before I started writing.
So what inspired you to combine writing with your love of animals and nature? Well,
I think two things. I mean, first of all, that my love of the natural world is the kind of overriding force in my life. It goes right down through the middle of me, like the writing in a stick of rock. But I think my love of language came to me because my parents, all my family is Welsh, and in Wales there is a great store set by words and literature and poetry and music. And I grew up in a household where that was very much alive. And both my parents came from very humble beginnings, from working class families. I come from a long line of miners and steel workers and smallholders. But my father, for instance, knew lots and lots of Keats by heart. So I would very often sit on the edge of the bath watching him shave in the morning, and he'd be reciting, Season of Mists and Mellow Fruitfulness. And I learnt those poems, and I think they kind of patterned my brain and gave me a great love of words and language. There's something that I do with every group of children that I meet. I ask them if there's anybody in the room who likes animals. I have never been with a group of children where every hand didn't go up. They have an absolutely innate fascination, because I think as children we still feel that instinctive connection to the natural world, that instinctive knowledge that the natural world, we are part of it, it is a part of us, it sustains us, it's our evolutionary history, it's everything about us. And children are still very attuned to that and very open to that. And so I've got a gift of a subject. I don't have to sell it to my audience. They already love it. And they're already hungry to know more.
You have also, though, written about more serious issues like climate change.
Yeah, sure. And of course, anybody who's interested in conservation is very much aware that climate change is going to be the huge problem facing conservation over the next 50 to 300 years, until we manage to turn this great big ocean liner that we've started, turn it around. So yes, climate change is something that's really, really important to me. And it's part of being aware of climate change is part of the growing environmental awareness around the planet. It's happening everywhere. Quietly, from the grassroots up, people are beginning to realise that we don't have another planet. We only have one. And we need to share it with all the other species that live here. Not just because without them we would die of loneliness, and I'm convinced that we would, but because without nature, for all our technology, for all our mobile phones and our concrete roads and our whatever, we can't survive. We are utterly dependent on the processes of nature to produce the very air that we breathe. And people are beginning to realise that and to respect it.
Can you tell us a bit about how you combine how you fictionalize these serious issues?
Okay, I'll give you an example. I've written a series of books called Heroes of the Wild, and they're all positive conservation stories, very much drawn from the real world, but packaged up in a sort of fictional holder to make them exciting reads for young people. And what I've done for each one of those is, in most cases, I've actually visited the location involved. So I went to Bhopal to research a story about dancing bears in India. I went to northeast India to the Garo Hills to research a story about elephants. I went to Armenia last spring to research a story about elephant poaching. And when you go to the place and start talking to the people who are involved in the story that you're trying to cover, what you find is bits of real life kind of lying around on the ground that you just have to pick up and stitch together. It's like doing patchwork. You take bits of the real world and you stitch it together. And sometimes those bits have to be quite tiny, and so what you're doing is a mosaic. Okay. And sometimes it's a much bigger patchwork. Sometimes I'll be having a conversation with someone and I'll think, ooh, that's the whole of my first chapter written. Jolly good. All I've got to do is remember that and maybe just tweak it a little bit, change an age or a location very slightly, but basically that's my story started. And that's a lovely feeling. That's a lovely feeling. What I always tell people is if you go to a place and look hard enough, you'll find your stories lying around on the ground. All you have to do is be astute enough to pick them up.
And is this something that you think the students can pick up on?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm very keen on encouraging students to write from the real world. As artists, the art department here in Tasem is particularly strong. As artists, they're encouraged to draw from life. Mm-hmm. I would say, as young writers, draw from life. Look at what's around you. Hone your descriptive skills on what you see every day. Listen to the conversations that are going around you. Get your ear attuned to the rhythms of speech and the patterns of what people say. Keep a notebook, write it down. And that's your source material. Even if what you then do with that source material is to use it in the construction of a completely fantasy world, your fantasy world will have its roots in the real relationships between human beings and will therefore have a power that if you'd completely made it up out of your head, it wouldn't be so powerful, it wouldn't work so well. There's been a lot of talk about fantasy writing this week with the death of Terry Pratchett.
Yeah.
And what people have been saying about his most famous series, his Discworld series, is that although the location and the world that he created was completely fantastical, the people and the relationships that he put in that world, that he populated that world with, have a real connection with reality and real human relationships and real human problems. And that's because he was a good observer. He looked, he listened, and he put what was around him in the real world into his fantasy novels.